Spanish Town is often spoken about when people talk about Jamaican gang history. But further west, in Montego Bay, St. James, another landscape of fear is being shaped quietly over decades. Canterbury was one of those communities, dense, politically charged, and deeply scarred by violence. Canterbury was a place where reputations were forged early and rarely forgiven. It was here, in the mid to late 1970s, that Omar O'Neill Lewis was born. Long before the name King Evil would echo through police briefings and news reports, he was simply another youth growing up in a community where power, survival, and respect were learned fast and often violently. By the early 1990s, Canterbury was already known to law enforcement as a volatile zone. Gangs were not abstract ideas there. They were present, visible, and armed. As a teenager attending St. James High School during this period, Omar Lewis was already developing a reputation. According to reports later referenced by police and journalists, he was known for frequent fights and confrontations. More alarming was the allegation that he armed other students with prohibited weapons. This was not normal delinquency. It was an early signal that Lewis was comfortable with violence and influence, even among peers. These actions reportedly brought him to the attention of the police long before his name ever appeared on a most wanted list. The 1990s were formative years for Lewis, not just personally, but within the wider gang ecosystem of Western Jamaica. Montego Bay was experiencing increasing gang fragmentation, with groups like Top Flight asserting influence across different communities. During this period, Lewis became implicated in a violent incident that would further harden his trajectory. In an alleged gunfight involving members of rival factions, Top Flight gang member reportedly shot and killed one of Lewis's relatives. While details surrounding the exchange were never fully laid out in court, the incident was widely cited in later reporting as a defining moment. It placed Lewis firmly inside the violent gang landscape of St. James, not as a bystander, but as someone personally tied to bloodshed. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Lewis was no longer just a known name within Canterbury. He was becoming known to police divisions across St. James. Around this time, he began traveling between Jamaica and the United States, a pattern that would define much of his adult life. In June 2001, he was deported from the United States for criminal activities. Those specific details of those early charges were not always publicly itemized. What was clear, however, was that Lewis was already using aliases and was already embedded in transnational criminal movement, something Jamaican police would later emphasize as a major concern. October 2003 marked a turning point not just for Lewis, but for Canterbury itself. What became known as the Canterbury Uprising exploded into national attention. For 8 hours, heavily armed gunmen engaged Jamaican security forces in an intense standoff inside the community. Gunfire echoed through narrow lanes as residents were trapped indoors, terrified. When the smoke cleared, 3 alleged gunmen were dead, and 3 police officers had been injured. The operation exposed the level of weaponry and organization present inside Canterbury, shocking even seasoned officers. In the aftermath, Omar King Evil Lewis was identified by police as the alleged mastermind behind the uprising. Authorities described the event as being linked to a guns for drugs operation, with Canterbury acting as a strategic hub. Though Lewis was never convicted for his role, his name became inseparable from the incident. Almost immediately after the standoff, Lewis fled Jamaica, heading back to the United States. To many investigators, the timing was no coincidence. The uprising had elevated him from a known gangster to a national security concern. In the United States, Lewis did not lay low. Instead, he continued accumulating arrests under multiple identities. By this point, law enforcement agencies believed he had used up to 6 aliases, including Kendall Joseph Smith. Records from Florida showed repeated encounters with police, including violent felony arrests. In February 2006, he was deported again, reinforcing the pattern: criminal activity, arrest, deportation, return, and re-engagement. Despite these deportations, Lewis managed to re-enter the United States illegally. His movements highlighted the porous nature of borders when paired with determination and criminal networks. Meanwhile, back in Jamaica, Canterbury remained tense. The seeds planted in the early 2000s were beginning to grow into something more structured. By this time, Lewis was being described by police as the leader of what would later be known as the Nation Croc gang, a group operating primarily out of Canterbury and surrounding areas in Montego Bay. In 2008, Lewis's name surfaced again in connection with a killing that would follow him for the rest of his life. At a nightclub in Montego Bay, 23-year-old laborer Oakley Richard Reed from Granville, St. James, was stabbed to death. Lewis was charged in connection with the killing and placed on Jamaica's most wanted list. Reports indicated that he was granted bail, but absconded soon after. Once again, he fled to the United States before the case could be resolved. He was never convicted in Jamaica for Reed's death, but the charge cemented his image as a man who always slipped through the system. By February 7, 2009, Lewis was back in police custody in the United States. He was arrested in Orange County, Florida, under the alias Kendall Joseph Smith and charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Authorities noted that he attempted to hide the firearm, further aggravating the charge. Around the same period, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents arrested him in Miami for illegal re-entry after deportation. He faced federal charges that carried a potential sentence of up to 2 years. Arrested alongside another Jamaican national, Michael Montego, Lewis once again found himself entangled in the American justice system. This time the consequences were heavier. Lewis was later sentenced to 6 years in U.S. prison for a gun-related offense. That sentence would keep him off the streets of both Jamaica and the United States until around 2016. For Jamaican police, his incarceration provided a temporary pause, but not closure. Intelligence suggested that, even while imprisoned, his influence and reputation remained intact back home. During Lewis's absence, Western Jamaica did not become quieter. Gang violence continued to escalate across St. James. Montego Bay, already a major tourist hub, was also becoming one of Jamaica's deadliest parishes. Gangs battled for territory, extortion routes, and control of illicit markets. The Nation Croc gang, allegedly founded and led by Lewis, became part of that violent tapestry. While specific murders were not always directly attributed to the gang in public court records, police consistently named it as a major contributor to the region's bloodshed. When Lewis was deported back to Jamaica after completing his U.S. sentence, authorities moved quickly. He was detained at the Horizon Adult Remand Center in Kingston, while investigators reviewed old and ongoing cases linked to his name. For months, he remained in custody as detectives searched for evidence strong enough to hold him. In the end, none was produced that could withstand legal scrutiny. Due to insufficient evidence, Lewis was released and returned to Montego Bay. His return to Canterbury reignited fear almost immediately. Residents whispered about his presence. Rumors circulated that he was forming what some described as a gangster government, positioning himself as an untouchable authority within the community. Police monitored him closely but publicly stated that they found no concrete evidence to support claims of new criminal enterprises. Officially, Lewis was a free man. Unofficially, his reputation alone was enough to influence behavior. By 2017, St. James was spiraling. Homicide numbers surged, with some years recording over 300 murders. States of emergency would later be declared as the government struggled to regain control. Within this climate, figures like Omar King Evil Lewis loomed large. Police described him as a top-tier gangster, responsible for several violent crimes and murders. Even though convictions remained elusive, his name was still spoken in the same breath as fear, authority, and unfinished business. On the evening of October 24th, 2017, sometimes reported as October 25th in official accounts, Lewis went about what appeared to be a normal routine. Just after 7:30 p.m., he visited Teja's salon in the Catherine Hall area of Montego Bay, reportedly for a manicure. Catherine Hall, a busy residential and commercial zone, had become another flashpoint in St. James's gang landscape. As Lewis exited the salon and entered his vehicle, gunmen struck. A drive-by shooting erupted without warning. Witnesses later described a barrage of bullets tearing into the vehicle. Lewis was hit multiple times. The attackers fled the scene almost immediately, disappearing into the night. Emergency responders arrived, but there was nothing they could do. Omar King Evil Lewis was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 41 years old. His killing sent shockwaves through Montego Bay. For some, it marked the end of a long-feared figure. For others, it signaled the beginning of a dangerous chain reaction. Less than 3 weeks later, on November the 13th, 2017, violence returned to Teja's salon. Around 5:30 p.m., gunmen opened fire, killing 2 women, Cleopatra Keisha Fletcher, a 41-year-old nail technician, and Darnett Shuttleworth, a 52-year-old airport employee. A man was also seriously injured in the attack. The murders were described as gangland style, executed with chilling precision. Speculation quickly spread throughout the community. Some residents suggested that one of the women may have revealed Lewis's location to his killers, triggering a reprisal. Police did not confirm any motive and urged the public not to draw conclusions. What was clear, however, was that the shadow of Omar King Evil Lewis continued to claim lives even after his death. 3 months later, Lewis was laid to rest in a low-key funeral in the quiet community of Spice Grove, St. Elizabeth. Heavy police presence surrounded the event. Several vehicles traveling from Montego Bay were reportedly turned back by security forces as a precaution. There were no grand displays, no public speeches, just a silent acknowledgement that one of Western Jamaica's most feared figures had exited the stage. Despite decades of allegations, deportations, arrests, and police intelligence, Omar King Evil Lewis died without ever being convicted of a crime in Jamaica. His life became a case study in reputation, influence, and the limits of the justice system. To supporters, he was a misunderstood figure. To residents of Canterbury and beyond, he was a symbol of fear. And to police, he remained one of the most dangerous gang leaders St. James ever produced. His story did not end with his burial. The Nation Croc gang